Hello! Welcome to the live stream. I really want a nap, so who knows how this live stream is going to go, although kind of topical because the age-old question around labor shortages is, do workers just prefer not to work? So I would rather just not do my job tonight and go take a nap instead. But I am not getting boosted unemployment insurance, so I guess I guess that won't gonna happen. Emily says would absolutely prefer not to work. Well, interesting things we will talk about is how the data doesn't actually parse that out to be true. That workers actually do. Workers, being us, humans, we actually do tend to prefer to work. Things we have learned. So the question is, what is the nature of that work, and in exchange for what are we actually willing to work? So this is the donut, and it's a whole journey, and I probably won't like it, but I felt like it was only fair to try it for you all. It is called CBD couch potato, and it's like CBD chocolate glaze and pretzels and crushed kettle chips. It is really a lot. Be Queer Make Stuff says, whereas I took a job before I needed to because I wanted human interaction and pin money. No, that's the thing, is like, it turns out that like both human interaction, a sense of purpose that has to do with like tangible things, it turns out to be very important to human psychology. But just from an economics perspective, we don't actually see that workers prefer to not work. It turns out that workers maybe prefer not to work 40 hours a week arbitrarily. So yes, it's very fascinating stuff. Emily says, I prefer to earn the amount of money I earn, which unfortunately I cannot do without working. For now, you can't, you know? If you invest, maybe someday you can earn that amount of money without working. It does, like, look... I'm not sure that it looks pretty. It looks like something. It looks interesting. I'm not sure pretty is... I agree with that statement. I think it looks interesting. Emily says, man, if those index funds do real good. I mean, you know, just put money in there and wait a long, long time. So yeah, that's what we're going to talk about today, is the kind of pervasive belief that we have labor shortages going on all over the world, which you could actually call a skill shortage more than you could call it a labor shortage, and we will talk a little bit about that. But the fascinating side effect of this is that low-wage workers' incomes, their actually hourly wages, have gone up 16% just this year. So the average hourly wage of a worker in the hospitality and service industries has gone up 16% on an annualized basis since the beginning of 2021 in the United States. And that is largely because of how challenging it is for employers to be able to fill those positions. So it is interesting to look at. And I think from a lot of our, you know, I've said this probably many times before, but like a lot of things in economics were able to be tested in a experimental way during the pandemic that people maybe didn't expect and certainly didn't want. And there are a lot of economic theories that are able to be explored based in real world data now. And a lot of the expectations or presumptions in economics are really being challenged by the pandemic. So it's definitely very fascinating. Welcome everyone to what will be probably a very short live stream because I'm very interested in a nap. So we do have a kitten who has joined us. She is very interested in mostly getting into and out of a box that we opened the bottom of to recycle, but now she has discovered she can sit in it and have like a box tunnel. But I guess she's decided to get out of the box tunnel and get into the box for the live stream. So this is my plan, is I don't have to talk about anything or do anything interesting as long as the cat's on the screen. Peyton says, seeing large companies complain about no workers while paying poverty wages is so delusional. Yes, very much so true. But that is actually what's very interesting about this. I guess we're just going to dive into the topic, and I'm not just going to vamp talking about the cat, because I think everybody is very interested in this. So, as interested as anybody who turns up to this live stream might be. So it's very fascinating looking at what is happening around the rich world right now with labor shortages. And there is a certain type of industry that is having trouble finding workers. And that is leading to those industries taking pretty extreme measures in order to recruit workers compared to what we were used to. And it's particularly fascinating because unemployment is still very, very high all over the world. So, the conventional economic wisdom is that you don't want this mismatch. You don't want to have a lot of open and available positions, but also high unemployment. And one of the reasons that you can get concerned about that, if that persists for quite a while, is that you essentially can have inflationary pressure. And this is all the people that are like, oh, we can't have all of this, like, we can't pay more to the workers who make our burgers because then the price of burgers will go up. That's part of it. But the other part is that you've got both impossible employees and employers. Oh, I don't know if you can hear that, but I just love living on an emergency route. It's great. Sirens all the time. But we're definitely having this, like, one of the issues is that you essentially have employers competing for these workers. And so, from the perspective of a worker, you're like, great, that means they have to raise wages in order to be competitive. But one of the concerns that you have is that you end up with inflationary pressures that can't be sustained. So then you end up with the economy hurting in other ways, right? So if you have trouble finding workers in the construction industries, and then that in turn means that they can't actually build as many houses, that affects other industries. It affects downstream, the timber industries and the decorator industries and the painter industries, like all of that things kind of flow from that. And so that's one of the concerns. That being said, I'm obviously not against low-income workers having a raise to a living wage. That is not at all what I'm saying. I'm trying to give you the idea of why this can make economists nervous. And there has been market intervention because we needed emergency measures in countries that could afford it in order to protect people for the purposes of public health that suddenly lost their jobs because we had, governments that mandated shutdowns of certain industries, businesses being closed, work from home that made certain jobs not available to people. And countries that had the money, rich countries, found ways to support the incomes of the workers that were suddenly out of work. So those were, it shaped out in different ways in different countries. So looking at the three most common countries that view my live stream that happen to be English speaking, because it's easier for me to read about it, would be the UK. So what they did is they essentially supported 80% of wages for workers that are out of work in the pandemic, and that is still going on. In the US, initially there was an additional $600 a week that went to unemployment benefits. That was paused last fall, but then it came back as an extra $300 a week at the beginning of this year. And that is still going on as well in the US. In Australia, they had different forms of support, but that actual job support ended in March. And this is why what is so fascinating about this, because the argument that like, well, workers prefer not to work, and you know, in the US, that extra $300 a week means that 4 in 10 unemployed workers that are receiving UI are actually receiving more on unemployment insurance than they were receiving at their job prior to unemployment insurance, which is really concerning considering how low unemployment is in so much of the country, that extra $300 a week means that 40% of workers on unemployment insurance are actually receiving more than they did at their previous jobs. But what is fascinating is because different countries chose to structure it differently and different countries are choosing to reverse it at different times. We can look at Australia and say, okay, well, if it was just about workers wanting, not wanting to, not wanting to work if they were getting paid more on unemployment insurance, then we would have seen a huge boost in job applications, and we essentially would see this labor shortage dry up the second that job support ended in March. But that was not true. Actually, Australia's labor shortages have only increased since the job support ended in March. And in the US, we would expect to see a huge uptick in applications that happened in September when the extra $600 a week ended. And we would have seen another uptick or another downtick in job applications happen in January when they restarted that extra $300 a week for unemployment insurance. But what is running the economy at this point is not money. What is running the economy is the virus. And most workers that are out of work are saying they are out of work, and they if they are seeking a job or they are concerned about finding a job, the big concern that they have is safety and health. And Australia is having a much slower vaccination rate, as is the United Kingdom, than the United States is, because United States be rich and we just figured out how to get vaccines. And, healthcare is a huge industry here, and therefore we have lots of innovation, but mostly we have money. And so that is the number one big concern. And then the secondary concern is having to care for family members. So needing to have childcare or elder care in the home, and there not being options. Schools are still closed in a lot of part of the world, or if they are open, they might not be open all the way. They might be part-time open. A lot of daycare is closed. And we saw huge uptick in September when schools were reopening in lots of countries where they were reopening, but particularly in the United States. We saw a huge amount of women drop out of the workforce because they needed to take care of kids because schools were not fully reopened yet. And that is the big concern. If there is no option in order to watch your family members or your kids, even if you are vaccinated, even if you do feel safe getting back to work, then you don't have options yet, right? So that's one of the big, fundamental issues here is safety, which we have a pretty heavy expectation that safety will change as everybody gets vaccinated. And the concerns about, what it looks like to care for family members, particularly children, when schools are still closed or part-time or daycares are closed or whatever. Last, but certainly not least, is the big factor that goes into this is wages. So what happened was the jobs that disappeared and took quite a while to come back were close contact jobs. They were low wage jobs. So they were hospitality industry jobs, which is always pretty much hospitality in any recession, even if it isn't a pandemic recession where you can't travel. Hospitality is one of the first industries to see contractions. But those jobs dried up very quickly, and they don't make a lot of money coming back. So you now have workers that were out of work and they were looking for jobs in other industries. And there were other parts of the economy that actually grew and are still growing. So, for example, construction jobs actually have the least available openings, and they are extremely competitive right now because of the way the housing market has been in most of the world. The housing market has like only been increasing during the pandemic. And so there's actually like quite a lot of construction jobs available. A lot of workers switched from jobs that were something close contact, like cooks or servers or nursing assistants, into jobs that were offering huge boosts because they saw huge like raises. So warehouse jobs that were getting hazard pay because they were so desperate for workers because everybody started buying everything online. Delivery workers, a lot of those workers had already shifted and moved to other industries, or if they haven't moved yet, they are very quickly going, okay, so I could go back to work for minimum wage in the service industry, or I could go into a job at $15 an hour, $17 an hour in a warehouse. And those industries, because they were growing during the pandemic, found ways to attract workers because they were desperate for workers. So they had already raised the wages. Now that hospitality is reopening all over the world, what's happening right now is that they have not adapted to the changing market conditions around low-wage workers. So very fascinating things are going on as far as what is happening with wages right now, because like McDonald's, Olive Garden, Chipotle, they have all decided to raise wages. McDonald's says that they're going to get to the $15 minimum an hour wage by 2024, which is still pretty slow. They also said they're going to raise like certain like supervisor positions to $17 an hour. Quite a lot of these hospitality jobs are trying to raise wages, but they're still having trouble attracting workers because workers are still scared. The other thing that is happening is that, so raising wages is one of the ways that you can attract workers, obviously. But if employers perceive that raising wages is like that the labor shortage is temporary, so if they think, oh, like, yeah, this is gonna, once unemployment runs out, you know, this extra unemployment runs out, then it's gonna be easy to find workers, then they won't usually raise wages, because raising wages is very hard to undo, right? So once you do it, it is permanent. It is extremely hard to cut wages and retain your workers. So what they can do is what they can do instead is what they are doing. They are doing, signing bonuses. There was a casino in Ohio that was offering a $4,000 signing bonus if they could sign dealers at the casino. You're seeing things that are one time because they don't want to long-term raise wages above what they're at right now. They want to attract workers now, but not have to be locked into that higher wage. So it is very fascinating. That being said, the data parses out wages for low-wage workers have risen more during the pandemic than any time in the past 25 years. And that isn't just in the United States. We're seeing that in the United Kingdom. We're seeing that in Australia. We are seeing that essentially in rich countries. So it is very fascinating. Joe says, yes, we've been watching the farmers complain about fruit pickers, and we're all frustrated because we know they pay lower than our minimum wages and do all kinds of crap. Well, so that is the other fascinating thing. Speaking of pickers, that is the last final piece of this labor shortage, is that borders are locked down all over the world, and migrant workers are an important part of economies. Migrant workers are an important part of economy, not just rich economies. Migrant workers fill skill shortages. Migrant workers fill needs. And because of border restrictions, and in some cases, actual ban on migration, what has happened is we are not seeing that right now. And so one of the issues that we're having is we're having opening for jobs that would normally be filled by migrant workers that are going unfilled. And that is true in New Zealand, Australia, United Kingdom, which is dealing with its own triple effect, which is that they also have Brexit. So they have migrant issues as far as borders being locked down. And then they also have migrant issues in that they no longer can get migrant workers from EU countries that previously might have come to England to work for seasonal work or to fill hospitality jobs. I don't know if you have ever been to London pre-Brexit, but literally no one that works in the hospitality industry has a British accent in my experience in London. It is a city full of migrants, and migrants are quite often what forms that like lower service wages. And previously, they had access to a lot of people from lower income, more poor countries in Southern and Eastern Europe, where the wages in London would more than make up for the, extra cost of being a migrant worker, simply compared to at home. Claire says, I'll believe that $50 an hour by 2024 just as much as I believe companies decrease X emissions by 2030 goals. I think the thing with the McDonald's one is that it is some of those like $15 wage by blah, blah, blah. A lot of those are actually more locked in and stepped up than emissions goals, which are like, we will do something, but we have no actual plan to get there. So McDonald's does have an actual plan to ramp up, I should say. Peyton says, I hear a lot of older people saying that we need to have children and we need to work for low wages and we can't do both of those things at the same time. Exactly. I mean, that's one of the like very frustrating things. I will also mention the people that say that you need to have children, they are usually not referring to where the growth in children is normally happening, which is that it tends to be a highly racialized discussion. What they are often saying is that we need more rich, white, middle-class children, and they are not actually looking at where we have growth in larger families, which larger families and more children tend to be happening in like people of color and migrants. And the narrative is not, oh, we're so concerned that we don't have enough, black babies. We're so concerned that we don't have enough, like, Hispanic babies. That is not the discussion that is being said by the people that are saying, oh, you need to have more children. So it is very fascinating to look at what is happening. Did I miss anything in my list of, like, I just went. Oh, one fascinating thing that is happening is that a lot of states are looking at what it would look like to structure their unemployment program so that there is less disincentive to work, so to speak. It turns out that a lot of them are looking at structures where they can actually have bonuses for people that do get off of unemployment, rather than have the extra payment per week. It's a fascinating thing. Arizona, of course, was one of the first to move to it. So they are doing like a $2,000 like flat cash payment if you get hired out off of unemployment. And they have figured out a way to be able to direct their extra unemployment income that had come from the federal government into that. Claire says, wow, you're right. The whole panic over people not having enough babies makes even less sense now. I mean, at the heart of everything, it's really just racism, right? Unfortunately, that is the bedrock that rich countries were built on, was racism and colonialism. And, that's the end of the story, really. Emily says, are you suggesting that socially conservative political commentators are acting disingenuously? Possibly. Does anybody have any questions about like what is happening with labor shortages? I think a lot of people's perceptions. So in general, what is happening right now is a big win for workers in lower wage occupations because they are being given bargaining power and they are being given more grace to search for jobs that might be a better match. One of the problems that you're running into, though, is that the lower wage workers are less likely to be able to move where the jobs are, so to speak. And our economy is getting fundamentally restructured. So you might have a bartender who lives in Brooklyn and works in Manhattan who lost their job last March, their skills are in bartending. Their skills are not working in a warehouse. However, the jobs that are coming back, those are jobs in suburban New York in warehouses for Amazon or whatever, or delivery driving. And so one of the problems that we're running into is as jobs are added, they aren't necessarily matching what the skills that workers have. We are seeing that like quite a lot of industries are getting more flexible on qualifications. So as pubs reopen in the UK, they are stopping being so picky about the qualifications to pour a pint. And that is largely informed by the fact that it is very competitive for them to attract workers over other pubs. So also the lengths that businesses will go to in order to not have to raise base wages is, it's a thing. There are some McDonald's that are paying people just to show up to the job interview. Like they're paying people like $50 to show up to a job interview. One of the structures of unemployment insurance in the United States is that you have to apply for jobs in order to keep maintaining it, some of which was suspended last year during COVID-19. However, now that's back in most states in the US. So you have to keep applying and showing that you're applying. But one of the flip sides is that if you get offered a job, you have to take it. Otherwise, you won't qualify for unemployment insurance anymore. And so that leads to workers not wanting to apply to jobs that they wouldn't want to actually take. So if they're concerned about like either safety at the job, or they are like, not actually sure how they're going to make childcare work, or they don't actually want that job, throwing craps at a casino or something like that, they might be applying to jobs, but then not showing up to the job interview. So like McDonald's is actually paying people to show up to job interviews. Does anybody have questions? Claire says they can't just decide to get to 15 now. McDonald's and some of these other chains are actually in a more tough position because a lot of their workers are franchised. So it is harder for McDonald's can't dictate the wages that their franchises have to pay. And so what you are seeing is that McDonald's is taking some of the requirements. So they're essentially trying to require franchises to offer like stepped pay for workers. And they are taking it out of their profits from franchisee fees. So that is one of the struggles that's happening is you've got these large corporations that actually are not, most McDonald's operate as franchises, actually operate as very small restaurants. And so the only place that McDonald's can actually take that profit out is from franchisee fees. And they have a limit to how they can actually tell franchises to run their business as far as labor. And particularly, you don't necessarily want McDonald's dictating the wage of, certain workers, because McDonald's is such a beautiful example, I feel like, because The Economist does this thing every year called the Big Mac Index. And the Big Mac Index looks at the cost of a Big Mac all over the world. And it is used as a way of measuring the purchasing power parity, meaning like exchange rates only capture part of what actually like the inputs cost in a various place, right? So it is a lot cheaper to buy a Big Mac in India than it is to buy a Big Mac in Switzerland because the inputs are cheaper, right? Like you're paying less overhead, you're paying less, you need to pay less for workers in order to have those workers to have a like comfortable life in, in rural Karnataka than you have to pay for a worker to live in Manhattan. And because of that, electricity costs less, the actual food that goes into it costs less. And so one of the things that you run into is that like you don't necessarily want to dictate, if you are McDonald's, that workers have to get paid $15 an hour if that's in a part of the country where that would mean that like none of your franchises would be able to survive or operate because you like, all of the other wages in the area are at $10 an hour and the cost of living can reflect that. Like, you don't necessarily want to require that franchises in rural Appalachia pay their workers $15 an hour because you might not have any franchises in rural Appalachia. Uh, that reminds me of something I've been meaning to ask you to explain sometime. The difference between exchange rate and actual purchasing power of currencies. Oh, that's like a whole live stream. I would love to actually dive into that. Exchange rates, the simple answer is that exchange rate has nothing to do with purchasing power, mostly. Exchange rate is about the value of the actual currency as an instrument. So if you disassociate from the idea of like what a dollar is and you think about like the value of chapstick versus pens and how many like pens you would be willing to trade for a chapstick. Hand sanitizer would have been a better example, but we all need chapstick now. We're wearing these masks. It's drying us out. The chapstick went up in value because it was in more demand. And you see this happen with currencies that are, currencies that go up in value. It may be because that their economy is doing really well, or it could be because they have some sort of exchange value that, like, for example, the US dollar, one reason that it maintains a pretty good consistency in exchange rates is because a lot of other currencies actually use us. They peg their exchange rate to the US dollar. And because we are the world reserve currency, I know that I go on and on about that. But although I have some theories I would love to talk about how I think we're on the way of the great British pound sterling. But the, the value of a currency, say the euro versus the, ruble, is vis-a-vis one another. It is not vis-a-vis whatever the local currency is to buy. So, like, if these are rubles and you live in Russia, then you only use rubles to pay everything down the line. If you are not doing anything that involves trade with, the European Union, if you are not purchasing things that are manufactured in Europe, if you don't have, if you aren't sourcing any of your oil or your cars or whatever from the European Union, you as a person who lives in Russia and gets paid in rubles and then pays your taxes in rubles, you don't care about the exchange rate. But purchasing power parity has, exchange rate is when you do go on a vacation to Greece and you need to buy things with euros, you will then, the exchange rate is how much euros you get in exchange for the rubles. And that has more to do with the economy's overall, like, exchange and the value of their currency vis-a-vis other currencies than it has more to do with the central bank than it has to do with, what you make. So you exchange it into euros, but purchasing power parity is how much your rubles that you get paid, say you get paid, 20 rubles a day, once that's exchanged into euros, how much can you buy in euros? So if 20 rubles equals one chapstick, €1, what can you buy with one chapstick? Can you buy 3 coffees? Or can you buy 1 coffee? Or can you buy half a coffee? And that's why, so exchange rate for the euro, this is actually a perfect example. It is a lot more expensive to buy things in Paris, even though they use the euro, than it is to buy things in Greece. And that's because the purchasing power parity is different, even if the exchange rate is the same. Does that kind of make sense? Dean says, London used to have a huge remittance economy. Used to. I imagine that's not so now. Ooh, I would love to. I've got plans to do why I think the US economy is on the way back to. I think the US economy is on the way of where the European economy or where the UK economy has gone. Claire says, oddly enough, I find I need less chapstick at work where I'm wearing a mask all day. Maybe I just don't notice my lips being dry because the mask is so irritating in other ways. Interesting. Yeah, I don't know. I am one of those very lucky people that only has to wear a mask for like an hour or two a day because I work from home still. And I don't have to see anybody. Which is probably why I tolerate them more. I don't know if I would love to dive more into purchasing power parity versus exchange rates and the different types of exchange rates. But I feel like it's a lot to get into peg versus floating peg versus fixed exchange rates right now. Because then you can start talking about like currency manipulation and stuff, which is, you know, a lot of people claim that the Chinese yuan is manipulated and there is some evidence for that. But yeah. It makes some sense. The answer is probably magic again. Purchasing power parity has nothing to do with magic. That is your personal sense of what you can buy with a currency, right? So you have a pretty good idea of purchasing power parity. It's actually more probably what you think of as it's probably what you think of when you think of inflation, because it has a lot to do with just like what can a good buy you. So when you think of like, you know, how much $20 can buy you in New York City versus in Atlanta, you have like a pretty instinctual idea of purchasing power parity. When it comes to exchange rates, the answer is pretty much magic. Yeah, exchange rate. Yeah, exactly. Exchange rate is purchasing power parity has nothing to do with magic. The worst Disney ride sounds great. I mean, that's pretty much what Epcot is, isn't it? Like really kind of boring rides. I would go to an economics theme park. Actually, I would like the live stream to tell me if we should do this. So, should we go to Legoland in Denmark, in Billund? So we are flying into Billund, which is not super, by Danish standards, not super close to Copenhagen. By US standards is the distance of you would drive for a taco in from Copenhagen. We're flying into Billund because we got these like super cheap $300 flights to the Denmark. And Billund is where Legoland is located. However, when we watch the videos for Legoland, I do not know if for an adult without children, it is $80 worth of value, because it's like 80 US dollars or something like that to go for the day. And as someone who isn't like a big theme park person, I really struggle with whether or not going to Legoland, which has clearly been designed for children mostly, is worth the $80. So, yeah. Dean says, lots of increasingly desperate ads for chefs on my local Facebook pages as pubs reopen. Yeah, well, so there was a study in California that actually showed the most at-risk profession for contracting COVID-19 is restaurant cooks. You would think it would be like emergency workers or, you know, people in like personal healthcare service or something like that. No, it is cooks, based on a study in California. Obviously, not the most extensive ever, but yeah, it is. So I can understand why it's desperate, and also like in the UK, you probably are stuck with like the fact that vaccination rollout is not going quite as fast there. It was like very fast in the beginning, and then it really slowed down quite a lot. So you have way less people that are fully vaccinated, especially in probably the working age category. So the workers that you have that would normally be in those lower hospitality industry jobs are less likely to be vaccinated and even less likely to be fully vaccinated, since it just opened to people over 34 like 2 days ago. So, yeah. All right, some people really like Epcot. I don't know. I last visited it when I was like 8 years old. So you're like, my perception of Epcot is based on being 8. Claire says the economics theme park would have roller coasters shaped like all the recession recovery curves. A K-shaped recession, whether you go up or down, depends on the circumstances of your birth. The socioeconomic structural inequality ride. It's just like a teeter-totter, but you get stuck at one end based on a randomly selected pattern. I mean, you're literally just You're literally just describing like economics and socioeconomic studies. It is the nerd park. Okay. Well, to the 8-year-old self, it was not compelling to me. I think also the other problem I had with it was like I like didn't know the context for a lot of the things. That's one of the big problems with theme parks. If you like haven't watched the movies or the shows or whatever, then it can be challenging. I do not remember. I remember just like being in one ride. That's all I remember of Epcot, and that I was very bored and I wanted to go home. Should I eat this donut now that I've gone real deep into labor shortages? Kitten is tired. All right, I'm going to show you the donut again. This is a CBD couch potato, and these are kettle chips, and these are pretzels, and this is CBD chocolate, and then the bottom is just like regular donut. It's quite the experience. So I don't really like chocolate, as people know, but I thought like this is weird enough it was worth eating on the live stream. It's very chocolatey thus far. The pretzels are thus far my favorite part. Does CBD chocolate taste like something? Or am I just going to be a lot more relaxed about labor shortages and purchasing power parity by the end of this? I don't really have a good concept of like if this is enough CBD to relax me or if it's just a way to make chocolate more expensive. Peyton says, at this point, I am so bored without travel that I'd be down to go to Jurassic Park. Is Jurassic Park at Epcot, or are you talking about the actual Jurassic Park? We are going to LA next month, and it feels like a freaking vacation to me, even though we are literally going to visit a consulate. Like, it is the most boring reason for a trip. But we're staying in a hotel. Although a hotel with our own kitchen, so that like, because I feel like now we have new CDC guidelines, I'm a lot more relaxed about the thing. But initially it was like, we really want to make sure that we can like avoid everything. But yeah, we're gonna stay in Santa Monica. And it's a 2-day trip, which I previously would take on no notice, not even thinking about it, barely packing a bag. And I am like, have been anticipating it for months, even though the primary purpose of the visit is to visit the consulate. That being said, we are going to do a live stream with K Mikey M, which will be on a Thursday night, I believe. I think a Thursday night while we were there. K Mikey M is the world's first publicly traded person. You can be a shareholder of K Mikey M. I am also a shareholder of K Mikey M. So, if you are, I can't see things on the screen, just so you know. It just loaded a YouTube logo. Yeah, so it should be fun, and maybe some people that are normally not able to attend the Saturday live streams can tune in for the Thursday live stream. K Mikey M is very fascinating. I did a podcast episode with him a while ago. So you can always dig that up if you want to learn more about being a publicly traded person. Joe says, ooh, I had no idea what CBD is. CBD is like cannabinoid something. Gosh, I should really know this because I worked for a congressman who pushed very hard on the industry. And I had to do research on it. But the downside that I find is most CBD stuff seems to be contained in chocolate. I hope I don't like get you can't get high off CBD, right? Peyton says, I went to London for 2 weeks with just a backpack in 2019, and now I would need a bag just for Germ X and masks. Yeah, I have been thinking about this because I got deep into my, I'm deep into my fantasies about travel right now. And I ended up reading almost the entirety of the 4-year-long blog of the Odyssey expedition. This guy, Graham, who was the first person to travel to every country in the world without flying, took him just over 4 years. And he also was the fastest person to travel to every country in the world. And he did it super budget, couch surfing almost the whole way, riding on the chicken buses through. He got thrown in prison in Africa twice. Anyway, I was reading that and I was just having so many moments of thinking back to all the ridiculous, grody couch surfing and stuff that I did, and how much a lot of my travel has been reliant on people just opening their homes to a stranger coming in with germs from the previous country. And I wonder what that's going to look like in the future. Although I have gotten very excited about if I really do get EU citizenship, I am considering what it would look like to try to set a Guinness Book World Record for the fastest to visit every EU country by scheduled surface transportation, which is essentially public transit. That's a Guinness Book of World Records review world, and I think I can do it in 26 days. So that would be very fun. I'm only going down to LA with one tiny bag as well. I mean, I hope it's going to be okay. But yes, the masks is a real, should we have mask pouches in our bags now? Jurassic Park Twitter makes my day better. What is Jurassic Park Twitter? But yeah, I'm in deep travel fantasy mode. But I have 3 trips planned in the next, 10 months. So that's something. 7 months? 7 months? Aaron says, I'm looking forward to packing a bag full of live streaming gear. Yeah, I'm really interested to see what Aaron is going to pull off because he's accumulated so much live streaming gear during this pandemic because he started really focusing on his live stream YouTube channel, and things just show up at our house every week, different live streaming rigs, so. Peyton says, I don't need any more Twitter in my life. I am at capacity. I think that's how a lot of people on Twitter feel is true. I'm sorry I'm not, eating more of this donut. I really can't taste the kettle chips at all. The coffee is just so overwhelming. It tastes exactly like a donut that combines all these things would taste. I don't taste any CBD specialty things. It just tastes like chocolate, but also I don't really like chocolate, so, any amount of chocolate just tastes very chocolatey to me. Question, do I like this better or less, more or less than the mac and cheese one? I think I liked the mac and cheese one better. And I think it's just because of the chocolate situation. Yes, donut review is as described. Does anybody have any questions about donuts or labor shortages or all the places I'm fantasizing about traveling? I assume they put CBD in the chocolate so you don't have to taste it. Chocolate is a fairly strong flavor. Do you think it's going to chill me out from this amount of donut? Because I could use being chilled out. Although I really wanted to nap before the live stream, so. Are there any donut shortages happening? No, but finding workers for donut shops. Dunkin' Donuts is offering $300 signing bonuses to workers. I do have some donut facts. Look at me. This isn't gonna chill me out, Claire. Why have CBD in it at all? Is it like supposed to relax my muscles or something silently? Emily says, I'm excited to start looking at train travel again. Yeah, I am, my fantasy trip. So, I mean, I have only one Amtrak route that I have not ridden left. So I'm like, I'm done with the US. I've crossed the US by train like over 20 times. The thing I am excited about, train travel wise, is I am getting extremely excited about this trip that I want to do that is Zagreb to Odessa by train, with a layover at Sofia, then going down to Istanbul by train, and then across Turkey by train, then ferry to Cyprus, then ferry to Greece. I'm very excited about it. There's some good trains in there, but we will see. Emily says, I want to ride the whole of the Coast Starlight at some point. It is very fun, although they took away the... Coast Starlight, I think one of the coolest parts about it is that they used to have... it used to be that if you got a first class ticket, you got access to this, like, historic, gorgeous, like, 1920s first class lounge, and they had, like, free wine and stuff on it. And it was very nice, beautiful train car. And they took that away like 2-3 years ago. And obviously it's not happening in a pandemic right now. But yeah, the Coast Starlight is a fun train. It's never runs on time. Thanks to Amtrak not being able to offer enough money to convince the freight to not hold up that train. So it's one of the worst corridors. Peyton says, the only train I've ever taken was London to Cardiff, and it was fun. Oh, nice. I've only taken that train in the other direction, I believe. Well, yeah, I guess I've taken parts of that route up that way, but I've taken it the other direction. So I went from Dublin, Ireland to Shanghai, China by train, and the rail-in sail that you do from Dublin, actually from Holyhead, Ireland, which is just outside Dublin, and then you go over to the UK, and go through Wales, and then down to London. So that was my, like, UK journey. But you actually just buy the whole passage for the Holyhead ferry. It was very fun. It was nice to be on the Irish seas. They're very choppy, I will say. Claire says, I know less than nothing about CBD. I'm just not allowed to try it. I just don't think you're capable of being chilled out. Oh. Am I not allowed to try it for any reason? Is there a reason I should, like, look into it? Should I not have had this chocolate? Peyton says, I'm taking a train to Pikes Peak to get donuts next week. There is a donut shop at the top. Yes, that's great. Also, I wonder if I work on that train system, because I work on almost all of the Colorado Transit for my day job, so for GTFS. So Claire says, you don't work for the federal government, so I'm sure you're fine. Well, that's actually one of the reasons that I, like, don't do any illegal drugs, was for a long time I wanted to get a job with the federal government. However, they don't want me for other reasons, so, for the jobs I want, so. But CBD doesn't even show up in your, like, for drug testing or anything. I don't know. Peyton says it's in the cog. Oh, yeah, I do work on the cog. That's great. I may have just worked on that, like, last week. Welcome to the life of GTFS. Yeah, we have a statewide contract for Colorado for my job, so I work on like most of the transit systems in Colorado at some point. Also in Iowa and Pennsylvania and Vermont and Oregon. Except TriMet in Oregon, which is the city we actually like are based in and I live in. Because TriMet is too big and too fancy. They do their stuff in-house. Okay, well, if nobody has any more economic questions, how about you all just tell me what you're looking forward to this week? Or maybe what travel you're looking forward to. I don't know. What time is it? Oh yeah, we're almost at an hour. We made it through. We made it through, y'all. I am looking forward to Pedalpalooza is all summer this summer in Portland. So it used to be that it was 2.5 weeks long. And it is like an open source bike festival where anybody can add a ride. And there's rides on every sort of thing. They're all like mostly free social rides. It'll be like rides to see historic homes. It'll be like, queer fairy punk ride. Like the naked ride, obviously, huge ride, like 10,000 people in Portland. There'll be like, tennis rides and rides to look at trees. And, I led the Bowie versus Prince ride for a long time. There's morning rides. Anyway, they started as 2.5 weeks. And then it expanded to be a month like a couple years ago. And this year, because last year was like mostly canceled for Pedalpalooza, they made it all summer. So, and I think they also did that because they didn't want, it used to be that you were like I had one Pedalpalooza one year where I literally just took the 2.5 weeks off work and I tried to go to 100 rides over 2.5 weeks. So I just like go from one ride into another ride. And I think that they didn't want that like fervor of like competition, so they tried to like make it so that it was all summer, so they spread it out. Anyway, I am leading the kickoff ride, which is the big like, hey, Pedalpalooza is starting on the 1st of June, and I'm pre-riding the route this week, so I'm very excited about that. Peyton is going to Denver next week and Boulder in June. I'm hoping to go to the Northeast this summer, maybe Boston. Oh, Boston in the summer. I don't envy you. That sounds awful. But, exciting to go anywhere, really. Claire is planning for a hike with my husband and son tomorrow. It's been a week since we hiked our own park. Oh, been a while, not a week. I was going to say a week doesn't sound very long for a hike. That's very exciting. Yeah, I haven't really gone to any parks except the one with the track near my house and where I run. And I'm excited for Pedalpalooza because I am like doing a series of rides where I'm leading people to parks every other week. So at least I'm going to go to somewhere interesting every other week. There's a game called Theme Park Designer. Can I design an economics theme park? I have questions. I have a bit of a headache now. Do we think this is because of the CBD donut? What just happened?
She was surprised by me.
Everything's fine. I think the cat just attacked the camera.
She was very asleep. I woke her up. I'm sorry.
Oh, kitten. I think it's because you need a nap. I don't really need a nap, though. There's no redeeming reason why I need a nap. Didn't do anything that should require a nap. Claire says, I'm also of the completely uninformed opinion that CBD is snake oil. I don't think that's actually true, but I think the issue with CBD is it's not super regulated as far as it's supposed to be. Like the industry is trying to regulate it, but I think the issue is that like there's very little like standardization and stuff like that, and so it is effective at some of the things it purports to do. That being said, you really don't know what concentration you're getting, and I think there is a lot of, just like with marijuana from the same plant, you are dealing with a lot of people that claim that it can help with more than it can, right? So it's sort of like kale, yeah. Emily says, I think the volume of it in most commercial products is minuscule. I think that's true. And I think that was like because I think it was because for quite a while, like regulation really made it very challenging. So Peyton says, a pizza place, movie rental place sold CBD in my town a few years ago. Yeah, I mean, in Oregon, it's like everywhere. I don't think there's a place that doesn't have CBD on the menu in some way. Like, you can definitely get it on the pizza down the street for me. You can get it on donuts down the street for me. I mean, I live across the street from a smoke shop, and like I live on what's called the Green Mile in Portland. That's just like pot shop after pot shop. But yeah, you can get it at like a coffee shop across the way in your smoothie. I mean, it's everywhere here. But that's also because we grow so many cannabis plants in Oregon. It's like a huge industry because it's legal, and it's honestly been going on a lot longer than that because we've had medical marijuana for so long, and our threshold for what was okay about medical marijuana, like how you could get it, was very low. And then additionally, it's been super decriminalized since the 90s here, and we have the perfect environment to grow it, which is why the congressman, the reasonably straight-laced congressman I worked for, was pushing so hard on like federal both legalization but also just ways to make it easier for the industry, because it could be a huge part of our economy in Oregon, partially because obviously logging and forestry has had a huge decline here since the 80s because we cut down all the trees, and then the ones that we have left we're not allowed to cut down thanks to environmental regulations. And so Congressman Blumenauer that I worked for worked very hard because it could restore rural Oregon economies because we have the perfect growing environment for it. I think like Oregon has won the Cannabis Cup, which is like the world like pot competition for best pot among connoisseurs. I think we've won it like 9 out of 10 years. So anyway, we have an excellent environment for it. But we actually have an oversaturated market, which is why they're trying to figure out how to get CBD into everything. Because we grew too much, because we're not allowed to do interstate commerce with it. So because of that, we are very stuck. Miss Kitten is very suspicious and has gone on to do other projects. She is pursuing other opportunities now. All right. Anybody else excited about something this week, or we're just done discussing CBD? I really only know about it from an economic perspective, but I feel like I have a sudden headache that came on, and I'm going to blame the CBD. The pot cup judging standard really goes downhill the longer it lasts. I know, right? It's like, who gets judged at the beginning versus the end? I always had questions about how they got the pot there because it's judged in Amsterdam. And I, like, prior to any legalization in the US, but also, like, you still can't move it over federal lines, like over international lines. How is it getting there? So, questions I have. All right, well, everybody have a lovely, carefully. Everybody have a lovely week. Please enjoy, if you've got summer going on where you're at, please enjoy the beginnings of summer. It is happening here. And, don't consume any 3-letter things that you don't really know what they are. That's my recommendation. And next week, I will probably have a repeat donut because I believe I have finished all of the donuts for this round, and it's the last Saturday of the month. So, I'll see which one I return. Maybe I'll let the patrons vote on it. And Joe says, we have winter and I'm so happy. Oh, that's great. Is this because it's raining there? Is that why you're happy? And everybody stay safe And Summer of Funds begins on June 21st, so mark your calendars. It's coming. The announcement website should be coming out this week, and I will see you all soon.